afternoon and welcome to What to Expect from Your First Honors Paper, a workshop I've been teaching for almost 20 years. Hope it's not too stale. I have never taught it in this format before though, so that'll be fun. The first thing you want to do is print out the handouts that are, there's a link to them on this site. So you're going to have five types of handouts. You've got the Honors College Writing Guidelines. You've got each instructor's pet peeves, and you've also got this sheet that talks about passive voice. And there's 3 different files that include sample papers. And they're not full papers, they're just the beginning paragraphs and titles of 4 different papers from 4 different Honors 200 instructors. This workshop is for your first Honors paper. So that'll mean people in Honors 200, it's targeted for you. There's information here that any upper level student can also definitely use. So feel free to watch this video if you're an upper level student as well. I want to start by how honors papers are different than something you may have written in high school. And the simple explanation for that is all honors papers are analytic papers. We do not assign reports. The difference between analysis and report can be thought of in terms of the difference between different kinds of questions that you address in writing. So if you take your standard journalistic questions, who, what, when, why, where, you can actually put them on an analytic continuum. And where on one end you have sort of factual questions like when and where, and that would be questions you would answer in a report. And on the other end, you have questions that are more analytic and a little more conceptual, like how and why. To do this kind of work, you have to use a process which is essentially the scientific process. So the first thing you want to do is identify your topic, or in science you call it the research question. You don't start with an argument. That's sophistry. And we're trying to learn stuff. We're not trying to just argue. Okay? So you start with a research question that you don't know the answer to. You might have a suspicion, and you might have a direction that you want to focus on, but you can't know the answer, otherwise you're not a scholar. You start with your topic or your research question. Oftentimes, this is proposed to you by your instructor. Sometimes it's not. Even at the 200 level, we will sometimes give you an open topic. Most of us will narrow it down pretty much, but again, this varies by the instructor. The next thing you do is you deconstruct your data, and your data is almost always going to be in your readings. So here, let me illustrate this. Several years ago, the winner of the Honors College Essay Competition wrote an essay on a novel by Jane Austen, and it was the novel was Pride and Prejudice. Did Jane Austen write Pride and Prejudice? I can't remember. Whoever wrote it. And her research question was, why do people laugh in this novel? Or her topic was humor and laughter in the novel. It was a great research question. She didn't know the answer. So then she gathered her data. She went through the novel, and she found every instance where somebody laughed. Then she did the next part, which is insight, and this is analysis of the data. And she just looked at it, and she did that thing that kindergartners do with the sand table, where they're like, sorting things. That's why they give them the bottle caps, so they learn how to sort. And she sorted this data, and she saw that the data fell into 2 different categories. One category was people laughed because they had an insight. And the other category was that people laughed because they were frivolously trying to self-present themselves. And she also noticed that these categories were grouped by character. So the main character of the novel and her cohorts would laugh for insight, whereas the minor characters would laugh for frivolity. And she ended up making this really neat thesis where she then concluded that Austin was using two types for two different reasons. And it was a great paper, very smart. The very classic way of doing analysis without knowing the answer in advance. Now, you've probably done a bunch of reports. And the reports have these, they help you build these skills. Summary, organization, comparison. And these are skills we actually assume you have. And you will certainly be using them. Where you fall on this continuum to be analytical depends on your discipline. So, in history, sometimes it's contentious. Questions like this are actually contentious. Like when and where did an event in ancient history actually take place? Or even whether it took place can be contentious in history. In the type of history that I teach, for example, about World War II. And here, I want to know things like, why did the Eastern Front turn around in 1943? In the middle are questions like this, which can also be analytic. So, for example, there are people in the Soviet Union who were fighting against the Germans even after the Germans had taken over the territory. And the Germans answered the question of who they were by calling them terrorists, right? Whereas the Soviets answered the question of who they were by calling them patriots. Now, a scholar might have to find another word, like the word that's typically used in scholarship is partisans, people who had a particular side that they were defending, but there's no sort of valence of whether they were right or wrong or good or bad. So you can see that you could actually write an analytical paper about these as well. Nonetheless, you're always safe if your topic is a how or why topic. Questions, comments, or snide remarks? Oops, can't get those here. All right, let's move on. Another way that your writing in honors may differ from writing you've done in high school is that it's not really expressive. Now, here, each instructor is different, each assignment is different. And over the years, we've been expanding the range of the different kinds of assignments that we do. This particular presentation is mostly about formal papers. You will typically do at least one formal paper per course. So, plain style is about getting something said as clearly as possible without you as author intruding with some kind of flowery, expressive style. It's been very popular since about 1940 or so, and it was popularized by this pair of grammatical teachers or English professors known as Strunk and White, and they wrote this little tiny book called The Elements of Style, and you can still buy it for like $1 on the internet because there are so many copies out there. It's a great book. It's actually the book that I learned how to write with. Just buy it and read it. You don't need college. Save yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But allow me to summarize what's in this book, all right? They say that good writing is writing that is both concise and precise. That's it. Shortest possible sentences with the clearest possible diction. You'll notice that these words have the same root. Now, a little tip for learning vocabulary is to do this. Take something like this and think of as many other words that you know that have the same root. And then use inductive logic to try to figure out what it means. What do you think it means? So the root of both concision and precision is cutting. And that's how you get this beautiful, elegant, efficient, plain style. To create plain style, you need to know about active and passive voice and verbs. and that will be the next section of this presentation. Active and passive voice and verbs. These are really complicated because it's not just 2 things, it's 4 things. And many instructors conflate the 2. Okay, so let's take a chart and divide these into 4 things. You've got active and passive voice, and that has to do with sentence structure. And you have active and passive verbs, and that has to do with diction or word choice. Let's start with the more complex one, and that's the sentence structure. So your average sentence has a subject and a verb, right? And many of them also have direct objects. So you could have like this sentence. Singular, past tense, simple sentence, subject and a verb. It might also have a direct object, active voice sentence. To make this into passive voice, you take the direct object and you turn it into the subject. So you start, the direct object becomes the subject, then what? You have to change the verb, but now you got to use 2 words for the verb where originally you only had 1. This is going to be called the linking or the helping verb, and it's always a form of to be. There, passive voice. You lost something. The original subject. In order to put that back in, you need a prepositional phrase. Right here. There. Active to passive. They say the exact same thing, exact same information load. There's one difference. There's your word ratio. Remember concision? Concision is about using the fewest possible words to say the thing you want to say. Passive voice is 40% less concise than active voice. So you can take a 3-page paper and literally turn it into a 5-page paper by using passive voice. Students like that. You're writing in passive voice, you sound all scholarly, and you're done. Hey, excellent. Instructors don't like it. You turn in 5 pages worth of passive voice, and your colleague turns in 5 pages worth of active voice, and they're going to get an A and you're going to get a B. And you won't know why. So let's look at the sheet on switching active to passive voice. And I'm going to go through some of these examples. You should probably print it out so you know what I'm talking about. I mean, I could do this, right? But that's not going to help. So these in italics are sentences that students actually turned in, written in papers. Here's one. Scholastic education is not looked upon as useless and unnecessary in society. Passive voice, we don't know who it's looked upon by. You could say by other people or something like that, right? Here's the active voice version. Society values schooling. You can see that it's a ratio, a word ratio of much greater than 40%. Okay. It is from examples like these that forge the bonds of comradeship between officers and enlisted men. Leaders like these forge bonds of comradeship with their enlisted men. Or officers like these become comrades as well as leaders. It sounds simpler, but it's better writing. And then finally, when you look at the last examples, you're going to see how simplifying your base sentence allows you to create a more complex thought. In other words, writing an active voice literally allows you to be more intelligent. It's a very powerful tool. Let's look at verbs. There's only one passive verb, and the infinitive of that verb is to be. Now, I know that sounds like it's two words, but English grammar is weird, and the infinitive form of this verb has two words in it. I'm sorry. You're probably going to recognize these words a lot more easily. This is the passive verb, and it's a perfectly good word. You can use it. But when you use it, all you're doing is defining something or making a claim of existence. Most of the time, your sentence is doing something more than that. So I want to say something about a chair, and I say the chair is blah, blah, blah. Well, why don't I just say chair? Why do I have to say is? I could just say chair, or I could say the sturdy chair, and then I'd have to think about active verb to say something about it. Next thing you know, my sentence is more information dense, and it's smarter. Again, this is not your best verb. Here's my pet peeve in terms of base sentence structure. This one. Moving on to the next topic, readerly documents. To create a readerly document, you need to know about the psychology of reading. The psychology of reading is that people are looking for independent units, and then they're moving on. When they find a unit, they say, I got it, and I'm moving on. And that unit is the subject verb. So the bulk of the reader's attention is on the subject and the verb, and they go through their reading by saying subject, verb, subject, verb, subject, verb. They're getting through the sentences. When they find the subject and they sign the verb, they feel like they're done. So the bulk of the reader's attention is on the base subject and verb of each sentence. If this is your base sentence, you have wasted their attention. Writing an active voice with active verbs, you're capturing their attention on the thing you really want to say. So you want to edit your sentences. Write them however you want. But when you go and edit, take out 2/3 of your is verbs. Let's talk about paragraphing. Most of you have been taught a lot about paragraphs, and usually you've been taught a recipe for creating a paragraph. Topic sentence, and then you have like your evidence, and then you have your examples, then you have a summary, and then you have a paragraph hook. And then like when you've done all those things, you have a paragraph. Let's go back a little bit and think about what a paragraph actually is. Why do we have paragraphs? Analytical question, right? Why? We have paragraphs because of the limits of human memory. A paragraph is not essentially a rhetorical unit. It's essentially a mnemonic unit. Short-term memory can only hold 7 things, more or less. Right? That's why the old school phone numbers had 7 digits. People knew that was like Psychology 101. It's like you take 1 week of psychology and then drop it. You'll already have covered this thing where that guy had that experiment where he like tried to remember things and he wrote it all down. And it turned out short-term memory is 7 units long. So your reader is going to read 7 sentences in their short-term memory, the memory where they can remember precisely what you said and compare it against each other is going to be full. So what are they going to do? I don't know if you've ever seen an Etch-a-Sketch, right? When you do this, Etch-a-Sketch, and when it's full, you turn it over and shake it out and start again. And that's what memory does. It dumps everything that's in short-term memory into an abbreviated version, into long or medium-term memory, and it starts fresh. Your reader's going to do that whether you like it or not. They can't help it. So you might as well chunk your prose into short-term memory-sized chunks. So in the Honors College, if you look at the Honors College writing guidelines under format, we tell you we're looking for 12-point Times Roman or Calibri, double-spaced. If you do that, a paragraph is this long. That's all you need to know about paragraphs. Now, all the advice about how to format a paragraph works within that. So yeah, you should probably start by telling them what you want to say. Topic sentence. Now, their choice, are they going to buy that or not? You have 6 more sentences to convince them to buy it. When they dump it into long-term memory, they're going to dump it into one of two categories. The category of things they buy and the category of things they don't buy. So if you convinced them in 6 sentences, you got them in the right category. Given that, does it make any sense to introduce a new topic at the end of a paragraph? Nope. Professional writers don't do that. And in the Honors College Writing Guidelines, under Organization, B6, unless your progression is intuitively obvious, use transitional expressions at the beginning of the new paragraph to reveal how it relates to its predecessor. In fact, all this information about paragraphs is based on the paragraph as a mnemonic unit. So, focus each body paragraph on a significant distinguishable point, generally articulated in a topic sentence. Develop or combine shorter paragraphs and trim or subdivide longer ones to create a linked series of paragraphs of roughly even length. Organize the paragraphs in a logical and progressive sequence. And then the advice about the transitions. Make sense? I hope so. Other points to create a readerly document. You want to think about who your audience is. For a formal paper in the Honors College, this is your audience. A college-educated reader who may or may not have read the specific text that you're talking about. College-educated. You don't have to explain who Shakespeare is. You don't have to even give Karl Marx's first name, although it's a courtesy to give the first name of very famous people in the first paragraph. You do have to quote specific bits of the text that you want to focus on their wording. You do have to introduce the text and the authors and contextualize them. So give the historical context. There's in one of the paper samples, they're talking about Dickens and Marx. And so the contextualization is that they were both writing during the Industrial Revolution in England. And that's a very important context for the argument that this writer is going to make. Use college level pacing. Don't drag your point on and on and on. It's just boring. The advice, say it, tell them what you're going to say what you're going to say, tell them what you said. That's not advice for writing. That's advice for speeches. And in speeches, you do have to do that because people can't refer back to what's on the paper. But in writing, if a college level reader misses something, they just read it again. You don't have to write the same thing twice. And if they didn't miss it, and you write it twice, you're just annoying them. So don't do that. Use college level pacing. Every sentence should say something different. Say it once, then you can elaborate if you want to. You can exemplify, which means give an example of. Do these things, people want to read your writing. Don't do them, it'll be a chore. Included in your handouts is this fun little document in which each instructor that you're likely to have this semester tells you their pet peeves and their things they'd really like to see. I originally created this by interviewing these people, and we did it at a bar, and they had to drink at least 2 beers before I let them talk. So this is like pretty much what they really think. And I want you to read everybody's comments, but of course you're going to focus on the instructor that you have. I'm not going to go through them now. One summary I could say is that all of us get a little tired of really naive, unsophisticated papers. So yeah, that's easy to say, but how do you create something that isn't that way? So the last category in today's workshop is scholarly sophistication. And I'm going to give you some specific hints for sounding more sophisticated. But they're very simple. I'm just going to organize them into two categories. One, know what the heck you're studying. Are you writing about history, or are you writing about a text? History is different than words. And the way you indicate the difference in a scholarly manuscript is you use past tense for history. And you use present tense for a text. Freud published Moses and Monotheism at the time of the Second World War. History, past tense. In it, he argues that monotheism originated in Egypt. In the text, he argues present tense. It's that simple. This is very helpful to keep track of what you're writing about in your text, but it's also accurate. Because stuff in a book isn't real, okay? And it's only real when somebody's reading it. So it's not there, and then you read it and it's there, present tense, and then you're done reading it and it's not there anymore. It's ink on a page, doesn't exist. It's knowledge, it's in your head, present tense. It's ink on a page, doesn't exist. So that will help you remember to use present tense for text. Know what genre you're talking about. One of the pet peeves everybody has is when students think that a book, any book, is a novel. Right? A novel is a specific genre. It's fiction, it's a long thing, it includes setting, characters, plot. So if you call Marx's Manifesto a novel, you're insulting Marx, but you're also showing that you really don't know what you're talking about. So get the genre right. Don't call anything a book. A book is a publication unit. Okay? So you can call something a poem, but you'll sound much smarter if you know what kind of poem it is. Is it a lyric poem? Is it an epic poem? Epistolatory poem. I don't even know what that is. I just made it up. But it sounded smart, right? If you don't know what genre it is, you can A, ask the instructor. B, go on Wikipedia. Because the first sentence in describing what this thing is will have to use a word for what it is. And that word will be something like collection of letters, or lyric poem, or memoir. Does this make sense? Yes. So this is something simple you can do to be scholarly sophisticated. This is something simple you can do. And there's another simple thing you can do, and that's get your titular conventions right. Now, titular is a word I would not use for a junior high school audience, but for you guys, it's just the adjective for this word, right? It's the conventions for marking a title. And here's how they look. There's a slide that has this typed out, so if my writing is not good, you can always look at the slide later. There are two conventions for marking a title: italics and quotation marks. In the old days, italics were marked by underlining, and this is how that happened. It had to do with the technology of print. Originally, there was no technology of print. Everything was done by hand. Okay? So if somebody wanted to distinguish between the title of something and what they were actually saying, they just switched their script. If I'm a monk and I'm writing a letter to the local landowner, and I say, let us discuss why the peasants must revolt. And I'm talking about a pamphlet. Then I'm going to switch to italics, and then the landowner doesn't have my head because I'm trying to advocate the peasants' revolt. Clearly, right? Or say you're going to write an analysis of something. You could do this. That's your title. Or you could do this. That's your title. You're either analyzing the character or the play. Right? You want to make the distinction. You don't underline anymore, though. The next thing that happened was that there was letterpresses, and people had trays of type, and they would pick out the letters, and they'd stick them into the thing they were printing, and that's how they set type. And you had a tray for Roman letters, and you had a tray for italic letters, and you just picked out the right ones. And by the way, they used to set newspapers by hand overnight. Typesetters would boom, 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 and set the whole newspaper, using tweezers. Cool. Anyway, next technology was the manual typewriter. You've seen those things. They go like this, right? To do a manual typewriter with italics would have needed a double-sized keyboard. Or each, you know how you have to shift up? You guys probably don't know this anymore. You would shift up to get a capital or a lowercase. But if you had to do capital, lowercase in italics too, you'd have to shift up 4 times. Wouldn't work. So they just said, screw it. We're just going to backspace and underline instead. With the advent of the electric typewriter, and then of course more sophisticated ways of setting type, you could have not only different italics, but you'd have all different typefaces. Didn't matter anymore. You didn't have to underline instead of italicize. So we don't do it anymore. So don't do it. It just makes you look like you're really old school. But what makes you look really unsophisticated is if you underline some titles and italicize others. That shows that you have no idea what you're doing. So don't do that. Just don't underline titles. Italicize. Okay? Here's how you make the distinction between whether you italicize something or put it in quotation marks. This is the unit, and this is the subunit. And for many, many years, I just remembered it this way. It just helped me, all right? So you italicize the name of a newspaper, and you put in quotation marks the title of an article. You italicize the name of a book. You put in quotation marks the title of a chapter. You italicize a collection of poems. You put in quotation marks an individual poem. And this is very helpful because oftentimes a poet will call the book after the titular poem. So, am I talking about Harmonium Italics by Wallace Stevens, a book, or am I talking about Harmonium in quotation marks, the name of an individual poem in that book? It makes it really clear if you know your titular conventions. Here's a couple more interesting ones. Paintings go here. Cartoons go here. And that sort of makes sense, right? Because a painting is published all by itself, and a cartoon is published in something else. So use your titular conventions, and what you are studying, it's clear that you know what you're talking about in terms of what you're studying. The next question is, what are you producing? Most of the time in the Honors College, you're producing a manuscript. And the economy of manuscript production is that your job as author is to create the words, nothing else. You do not design the text. That's somebody else's job. That's the graphic designer's job. Or you're writing for a publication, and the publication already has a set way of doing it. They know how they're going to set their titles. They know what spacing they're going to use. They know where the page numbers are going to go. You don't get to decide any of that. Your job as author is to write the words. And you're supposed to submit them in this clean file that they can then superimpose their graphic design decisions on. I know this, I used to do this professionally, okay? The first thing I always had to do was strip out all the crap that the authors felt compelled to put in there. Now, crap that you put in there is things like bolding anything, or changing the font, or changing the spacing. Don't single space quotations. You double space everything. The person who publishes it decides how the spacing is going to go. Okay? So you will find manuscript conventions, F1 and F2 of the Honors College Writing Guidelines. So, by the way, Microsoft Word defaults are not typical manuscript conventions. So this says, unless Microsoft Word defaults are accepted by your instructor, and sometimes they do, use Honors College manuscript defaults, which are 12-point Times Roman or Calibri. We give you those two choices because they take up the same amount of space. So you're not making your paper longer or shorter by picking one of these. Another reason we choose them is to give you a choice between what your values are. So Times Roman is the most readable font, and Calibri uses the least ink. So your choice. Are you going to be more green? And we also allow you to print either single-sized for greater readability or double-sided to save paper. Again, your choice. What are your values for this particular document? And of course, electronic submission, that's irrelevant. So you want to use manuscript conventions, and you want to use the appropriate disciplinary format. Many Honors College courses are interdisciplinary. So we're not like English department courses or history department courses or psychology courses at the lower levels, at the 200 level. Still, most of your instructors will have a degree in one discipline or another, and they might focus the course on that discipline. So, in psychology, you use APA format. In history, you use Chicago style. In English, you use Modern Language Association, MLA format. And so don't just make up your own format, use a disciplinary format. If your instructor doesn't care, it still looks better if you pick one. And you might want to pick one that's the discipline you're going to go into. Like at upper level, I usually say you can either use MLA or APA. And all the people who are in the sciences use APA, and all the people who are in the humanities use MLA. And it's nice. That's kind of it. That's all I got. I used to end with a diatribe against the 5-paragraph theme, but it was a little unprofessional. So you'll have to come and see me at my office hours as writing specialist if you want to hear my diatribe against the 5-paragraph